Welcome back. Let's close breakout rooms, move my windows around all again. Every single time I do anything in Zoom, it's like, no, let's move everything into new places that weren't the same places you're using before, even though you're doing the same thing. All right, can you still see my, oh, wait, you can't, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
I'm just gonna reset that just in case. Cool, you can see my editor and terminal. Fantastic. So let's see here. Galen, what do we call the method say hello on?
The method say hello was called on the instance of the class.
And what about new?
And new was called on the class.
Yeah, so that's like a kind of like this interesting distinction between the two, right? And so this class is going to be looking into the differences between what are called class methods and instance methods. So far, you've been using primarily instance methods to do things because you're calling the method on an instance of a class previously, whereas now, and you've essentially only used like new as a class method. So we define methods in our class. And we use this new method that we call in the class to kind of instantiate a new method, a new instance, and then we can use them, right? And so in Ruby, what classes are also objects. And there's this cliche, I'm like, oh, in Ruby, everything's an object. Well, yes, everything's an object. And so things kind of work in this very orderly way where things are objects and you call methods on objects. And they try to be as consistent as possible, though that we do not always manage to do so. So in this exploration of class methods and instance methods, what we're going to do is that we're going to break you up into groups again, and we're going to do this exploration, and where you're going to write some pseudocode. I'm going to post this into your Slack channel. There we go. And so you're going to be looking at this. We have this class of social media user, and we've given you an initialized method, but we have 4 methods here: rating, self, most popular, add, post, and self-defined. And we do not want you to write code for what would go in there. We want you to kind of discuss like what would go in there, like a pseudocode, like kind of describe the steps you would take, what you would want them to do, and like come up with like a difference for each of these methods. What's the difference between rating, most popular, add, post, and find? And I'm gonna let's create some new breakout groups. Recreate button. Yeah, it looks reasonable. And there you go. And we'll do this for, oh, I'll send you a message. And can you all still see my screen? Excellent, cool. It's weird because like it's supposed to be like this green box around my screen if I'm sharing it, but sometimes the box is there, sometimes the box isn't there. Who the heck knows what is happening? All right. Cool. So let's talk about like this exploration that you did together. Ryan, tell me what you discussed in your group.
So we were talking about how this example is actually kind of.
I can't hear you. Is this a me situation again? It is a me situation again.
Can you hear me now?
Try one more time. Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. We were talking about how in this situation, like if you had a social network or like a big social media
Mm-hmm.
that if you call social media or the class name and you put dot highest rating person, it'll go
Huh?
through all of the data and it will return a single like person that would be an instance of a social media user
Mhm.
versus if you instantiated a instance of a social media person and then you said like get ID, it would just give you their ID. The one thing that we did or that I brought up that I noticed when playing with some of these
Give me a second. I think I've lost you again for some reason. So I'm trying to.
We can hear him, or at least I can.
Yeah, same.
Can you try to say something? Yep, you're back.
So the one thing that I found kind of confusing when I was playing with some of this stuff is that like the idea that a class method lives inside of like the class definition, like so
Uh-huh.
the instance variable ID. So if a social
Yep.
media user has an ID instance variable with the @ symbol, and then you create a class method that takes an argument as an ID, like find user with an ID in parentheses, like I don't
Yeah.
think that those are the same arguments, and one's not going to transfer to the other.
No, they aren't. That's a really good point. So when the initialize method only really gets hit when we are we're instantiating an instance of a social media user. When we are using that self.find, we want that to go look for all the social media users and grab us that one user, right? So they are related, but also not. When we think about class methods, when we're using class methods are run on like the class, and therefore they're not like tied to any instance. And so we're not going to go too in depth in how to kind of make that work. It's kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing in module 1. But the thing is that like the stuff that you're going to be using to access data in the future, namely active record, uses this pattern, I think. And we're teaching you this because it's kind of important for you to see that, hey, there is a difference between class methods and instance methods, and that we should kind of separate between the two. But yeah, overall good response. So let's kind of go over just like the basic syntax of a class method. And so what we can do here is we do, let's say we make a greeter class, and def self dot say hello. Oops. And we do like this. And the standard syntax of a class method is it has that self dot at the front of it. And if we wanted to call this method, we would do so like this. Greeter dot say hello. I think the most notable point of this kind of using this kind of syntax is that we don't have to instantiate an instance of greeter in order to use this method, right? And we don't instantiate a instance of greeter because we don't have any state. Why bother like creating something and having it kind of stored in memory when we're just going to call this kind of like this behavior for it, right? And there are, and I think the bigger overarching question is why do we make some things class methods as opposed to instance methods? And so the kind of line of division between the two is that classes can be used to track information about all instances of the class, like kind of this example we use with the social media users, where we have that find, it'll know about all the social media users and grab us the particular one we're looking for, right? We can also make it so that a class is in charge of creating instances of itself, or situations where creation may be a little more complicated. I think a good example of this lives in your football projects, where we are making you use a class method in order to have things work the way as intended. And so when we talk about our social media user class that we had to kind of like investigate and pseudocode out, we can see like why most popular and find were created as class methods, right? They're not created in relation or concerning one instance of a class. They're looking at all instances of the class, and that's what sets them apart. So let's kind of take a look at an example. I need to like stop fiddling with things with my hands as I'm talking today. So let's do this and kind of give you this example. We have a user class, and we can do something like def initialize. It's going to take a name, very simple kind of user class. Name equals name. And we can utilize class methods in order to help us make things a lot simpler. And so what we're going to use is we're going to set up a class method in order to help us create multiple users at a time. And we would do that like this. Def self.create multiple user. I think it's users is kind of given. And we do users.map to user. New. Like this. And so what we're doing here is that we are creating a class method that will let us create multiple instances of users in just like in one quick shot. And so how this would look is that we could do something like users equals array. And I'm just going to use some white space to help us kind of clear things up. We'll make these a little clearer. Sal. And then we do user dot create multiple users. And what this does is that, okay, so we're calling, we have the user class, we're calling the multiple, create multiple method on it, and we're passing in users. Users is an array of hashes where the key is name and the value is going to be the name. So that goes up to here. And it's going to take users, which is an array of hashes. For every single hash, it's going to create a new user. And when we're done, this is a map. So what map does is it returns a new collection. And so now this line will give us an array of user objects. Logan?
Yeah, why would you use an array of hashes here and not just like an array of names in string already?
Yeah. For example, like what if you don't often in programming, you do not get data the way you want data to come in. And so this just may be the way that data comes in. Two, why do we make you do hashes? I think it's a bigger question. Like hashes are annoying. You have to use a squiggly brace, which like you have to hit like an extra button to get the shift button to get the squiggly brace. Like there's no one's got time for that. The reason why is that a lot of information communicated across the internet is done so in this format called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, and that you'll learn more about this in module 2, but that maps over to Ruby hash really well. So you can be expecting to be using hashes like a lot, and you can be expected to get information as hashes a lot. And so get it like that would be why in this example. But yeah, we could just have an array of names and we could still do the same thing. Like instead of this here, this would be like that. Oh wait, user, sorry. You know?
That makes sense. Thank you.
I'm sorry?
I was just saying that makes sense. Thank you for explaining
Yeah,
that.
no problem. Yeah. Other questions about what we've done here today? Not today, but like right now. And so this could also potentially lead us to another question. Can class methods also do what modules do? Yes, no, maybe. Thoughts, feelings? We're just going to stare at each other. Alexander?
I guess you could call a class method in another class.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, and for that kind of functionality of having a place to kind of pull out code where you can share code, a class method is potentially a way because you're not dealing with any kind of state, you're just dealing with behavior. So that is potentially kind of thing that there's some overlap in how you can use class methods as well. Yeah, totally. Cool. Question about class methods. Are there any other questions about class methods so far? Joe?
Yeah, could you show me like a quick example of like using it across classes? It's like, I don't know if you have time for that. Maybe that's after class kind of thing, but just to visualize it.
It would work very much the same way as you would another code. Like you would just require it. Let's do this. Let me do this. So we have this user class. Let's pretend that this is in a different file. We're going to create a class called class messages. And I'm going to pretend that we're in the messages files. I'm just putting in this in the same file, so it's just all in one place so we can see it. Def self.welcome. Welcome to Mastermind. Oops, no. And oh, maybe that doesn't work. And so I'm just going to put a 1 here. So I'm just going to say whatever below here, we're going to pretend is in messages.rb. And I wanted to use this here. Well, in this class, I would require lib, we're assuming it's in the lib directory, messages. And let's in here, we could do that. And we're just, it's just kind of like anything else. We require the file, and we can call it. Does that answer your question?
Thanks. Yeah, perfectly. Thank you.
Cool. So it works very much, doing it this way works very much the same way you kind of expect out of the code, right? You need to require the file in, and then you can access it as if it was just living down below. Fantastic. All right. That is the class on the class on class methods in the lesson plan, which you can find in the backend site. There is an exercise on continue to work further with it, especially in CSVs. We're not going to give you time to do that now. I would suggest probably working on that own to get working on that on your own later today at some point to kind of get a little more familiarity with class methods. And it'll be available to answer questions about them today. But are there any other questions about class methods before we transition? We take a Pomodoro break and transition to traversing two verticals. Windows are moving. Oh, Joey.
I guess, so this makes sense. What is the benefit of doing this model over like modules? Is there a functional benefit, or is it just kind of like personal preference?
Modules can be used to do a very number of things. I would I feel that in general, I write code that plays to my strengths and to the things I'm more comfortable with. And not exactly the best growth mindset, because like, you know, usually I'm running code, it's like I gotta get something done. So I will generally structure my code in a way that I just don't use very many class methods. That being said, like my main use of class methods are when I'm using things like Active Record, which you'll be covering in module 2. Personally, I would not use class methods to kind of replicate the functionality that modules would, to replicate functionality that could be done with a module.
Got it.
It's one of those like, but that is like a personal, like I will always kind of differentiate like between what is good practice and what is a personal choice. I don't think that there's anything really wrong with using a class method. It's just my personal preference is that I don't use them as much. Therefore, they are not like my first choice, not the first thing I reach for when I need to achieve this functionality. Cool. Awesome. Kevin?
Yeah, I was looking back on modules that share instance methods, and there's the specific notation to require that file and then to include like the actionable one. So would you ever have a module with like class methods? For example, like methods.creating users. Would you ever do user.creating users? Like use a class method from another class? If you know what I'm asking.
I'm not really sure what you're asking. You wouldn't use a class method from a different object to create objects of the first class, because that's not really where it belongs.
Yeah.
Right. Like I wouldn't ask like social media. Oh, what's a bad example? I wouldn't ask the post class to make me user objects. Right, like that, the create user. That like, well, that should be the responsibility of the user, not something else. Right, so you really wouldn't kind of like use class methods across different classes to create objects of itself.
Okay, so there's not really a module. For example, that social media. If there was another class called Facebooker, could you do Facebooker.findID? If that findID class method was established in the social media. Because it doesn't sound like there's really modules. You can't really use a class method from another class then. Kind of like. I
mean, the thing is, like the thing is that that's not really a great division of responsibility.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like the Facebook shouldn't be responsible for that. So like that's not something you would really want to do. Logan, did you have a hand?
I did, but you answered my question.
Yeah, I think that the biggest challenges around this kind of like using class methods is like you're gonna want to do some things, but like I think that we really need to like pause and ask ourselves like, well, why? Like does this belong here? And organizations like super important. Cool. All right, let's take a Pomodoro break. Let's be back at 10:05, and we'll start traversing verticals.